Hello everyone, today we talk about the chain of command of the Roman Republican army and more specifically of the Legati and the Tribuni. We will be quoting mostly from Livy and Caesar, that are the principal sources on this specific topic, and every time I make a video on Roman history when there are Latin names to pronounce, I start by saying that fundamentally every time there is a Latin word I pronounce, I usually pronounce first the restituta and then the ecclesiastical pronunciation. Just for saying that it's not that I'm undecided about the pronunciation, which is kind of the pronunciatio restituta, not even pronunciatio, how the ecclesiastical pronunciation in fact would want, but the restituta is kind of the closest thing that we managed to arrive, linguistically speaking, when trying to reconstruct how the Latins, or at least how Caesar fundamentally spoke or wrote around there. But this is kind of complex to explain. I should have a video explaining this, but I will probably be making it soon to get rid of the problem. But it's still important because that's kind of the closest thing to Latin we kind of were able to approach. The ecclesiastical pronunciation is also pretty widespread, and I must say one of the most difficult things ever on the internet is to find someone who actually gives I can't say a perfect pronunciation, because in fact it's just something approximated, but at least something remotely close to what our reconstruction actually is supposed to sound, because it goes both sides. At this point, it doesn't even has to do with whether being an Anglo-Saxon or a Romance speaker, because there are people who simply can't pronounce certain sounds. There are others who completely ignore that the ecclesiastical pronunciation is actually a modern one, in fact. So at this point, it's just a matter of picking up a book and reading it. But I'm saying also this because I've made some cuts on the topics that I will be talking on Schwerpunkt, especially from certain parts and of history that I realized. First of all, I had I had more difficulties to get quickly the right informations from, and that in fact I also know less, and that incidentally, so you also watched less, because I see this from the stats, and in their place I'm starting to talk more about Roman history. Up to now we have fundamentally talked only about the military stuff that we will keep doing. In fact, today's video is fundamentally just a continuation of that kind of series. You already know, but in the future, sometime soon, I will start also with actual Roman history, which is, it's mostly about war, but it's not just about war. So actually looking at the whole Roman history, and I think it's fine, because every time I make a video about Roman history, magically all the views rise up, and this can be a strategy, by the way, to make also Schwerpunkt rise accordingly. But I love Roman history. I just thought that it was a bit difficult to organize also the data, etc. Now I managed to arrange things the right way, and I think we can start. So with today's topic instead, finally. So you have to think that up to the late Republic, there was fundamentally no real specific figure at the command of a legion. These figures were usually entrusted, like others, to the magistrate that was in office at the time, which were either the consul or the dictator, or consul or dictator, if you prefer. We can spend a bunch of work. The consul in ancient Rome is this collegial magistracy. It was each of the two supreme magistrates who were created with this annual power, yearly power at the beginning of the Republic. They were invested with the military command, with the right to convene and preside over the senatorial and popular meetings, and the right also to propose laws, to care of financial administration, public wars, and they kept actually being elected during the empire, as that's kind of a known, although they kind of grew more limited in functions and relating to jurisdiction, to juridical matters alone. The dictator instead was fundamentally this extraordinary, we can say, Roman magistrature that conferred fundamentally was conferred by the Imperium Maius, that is fundamentally the fullness of civil and military powers. It could suspend all the magistracies. The dictator could not last more than 6 months. So it's particularly interesting because it was effectively a dictatorship, obviously always framed into the, but in fact, framed into the Roman institutional system. And he was followed by these famous 24 lictors. He was appointed at the request of the Senate and the consuls. Also, he later he was elected actually by the comitia or comitia. And the date of the institution was of the dictatorship, let's say, was pretty old. Was either the dictatura was founded in traditionally, at least, because that in those times it's not really history. It's mixed between myth and history, between the very end of the 6th and very beginning of the 5th century BC. Well, maybe we're not going to talk much about this now, but these were the figures that fundamentally had this major powers that also entailed the military command, in fact, that was to command the legions. So the legatus in Latin means practically tied. So that is the appointee, if you want. And he was fundamentally a counselor, a sort of advisor or observer of elevated rank, socially speaking. It was usually an envoy of the Senate itself, and this was a figure that actually was actually considered as a personality of great capacity and specific experience in some form, but it actually didn't own himself the function of military command, that is the imperium, that in fact pertained to the consul, usually to the magistrate. So he was subordinated to the consul, and you can go look about this Livy 259 and always Livy 470. And interestingly enough, the legatus could be named exclusively through a senatorial decree, a decree of the Senate. Also, the quaestor or quaestor in Restituta, that was the magistrate that was directly depending from the consul in charge of the military aerarium, that was fundamentally the economical administration that was given fundamentally by the Senate, this money that was used eventually to rise up the army, because that's how it worked before and it didn't quite change even immediately. I mean, it was the consuls that effectively in the Republic armed the legions as such, and there was this quaestor or quaestor was always kind of working together with the consul. We've seen also in the video on the Roman camp that he had a space on his own, etc. This was particularly important because it shows that was quite relatively early a substantial military administration, even when the army was not permanent still in this most of the times in the Republic. And the quaestor could, in case of necessity, actually, and always on behalf of the the magistrate take on fundamentally the military authority and to execute the role of the legatus as well. So it was contemplated that the quaestor, there was a magistrate, could temporarily also be entrusted for some reason the role of legatus, always at the dependency of the consul. And this is kind of normal, because if you think about it, this was the guy who was effectively administrating the army from an economical point of view, also about the supplies and so on. So this was a person who was directly involved into at least the logistics of the army. So the thing that makes literally the army move, and therefore could be kind of trusted, was a man of some experience. So only around the 67 BC, it was possible through an opposite law to appoint certain kind of persons of trust that were known as Legati Proprietor or Legati Proprietor, that had the task to carry out the function of military command when the consul was absent, fundamentally, or at least of whoever had the imperium at that point. This is important because you see towards this, the very end of the Republic, 67 BC. Now the Republic is rotting fundamentally. That there is an increasing privatization, with this kind of figures like the great warlords, figures like, in fact, the triumviri like Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, who at this point basically nominated their men of trust as commanders of the army at this point, and they were in fact becoming legati, who could literally assume the command of the army at that point. So they weren't just supervisors sent by the Senate, sometimes even to check what the consul was doing, but now they were fundamentally men of trust of these private citizens that incidentally also covered the magistracies and owned the imperium, and therefore were at that point actually really leading the Roman politics on their own, where the Senate was almost completely out of control of the matters of the city. In 58 BC, Caesar, on occasion of the battle against Ariovistus, against the Suebi, he decided to pose his own 5 legati and the quaestor, at the head of the 6 legions that he controlled, which evident and stressing how the command was entrusted fundamentally in such a way, only occasionally and discretionally. You can find this episode in the Bello Gallico 152. So afterward, eventually, starting from essentially the civil wars, at the end of the Republic, the legati instead acquired a growing, an ever important role, arriving to assume, always on behalf of the Senate, the command, the firm command, the stable command of one or more legions. So towards the end of the Republic, the legati were kind of now passing into the hands, were kind of men of trust of the same princeps in this sense. So what during the end of the Republic had been in the hands of the warlords, now was in the hand of a single warlord of Rome, who was in fact the emperor per excellence, and that, however, stabilized this and rendered permanent this office. So the tribuni were named directly, usually by the consuls and by the dictator, until 361 BC. From this year onwards, the way of appointing the procedures of appointing the military tribunes underwent kind of changing certain modifications that happen every once in a while, and sometimes the appointment was reserved directly to the councils. Other times actually said that the tribunes were elected. So the direct election by the people of all the 24 military tribunes of the 4 urban legions that existed originally as the core of the Roman army when the levy kicked in, became a law only starting from 311 BC. These tribunes back in the day were called Tribuni militum a populo. So these were fundamentally the military tribunes that were in fact elected by the people, and there were 6 per legion. They went 24, and there were in fact usually also 2 legions per consul. In fact, in 105 BC, there was a law proposed instead by the consul Rutilius Rufus, and this is told by Livy 7:5, that granted the direct appointment of other tribunes in addition to the ones elected by the people. These were nicknamed as Ruefuli. In fact, the tribunes that Rufus had established, but these new tribunes were generally appointed only for those legions that were now detached in the provinces. This is particularly important to understand at this time historically. These are the same years of the Marian reform, because now the legions that were maintained by the Romans abroad in a kind of semi-permanent way was growing very rapidly. So at this point we arrived at one moment where in fact the Roman army, even before the Marian reforms that basically just sanctioned a practice that already existed since some time, were de facto already permanent. And the most important ones now, also for the balance of internal Roman politics, was I don't remember how he started the phrase, but I want to say that the provincial legions were kind of the most important ones, because the control of the provinces now was consistently important, not so important like the control of Italy, but definitely influencing local politics. So at this point you have these tribunes that, they were less, but they were kind of more powerful, because the main political and military events took place in abroad. And just remember that this time basically there weren't Roman legions that could enter Rome. So the theory was that even the popular the practice actually was that now the popular legions, the one elected with the tribunes elected by the people, were kind of losing importance. They because at this point actually the people didn't control much on how the legions were the military tribunes were actually elected, and they were actually not even in charge of what the Roman military policy really was. So this was a way, I think, to just pass by the problem of the popular election, just saying, okay, we will and even though still the tribunes were elected by we'll see now, because the original ones were kind of considered more authoritative, in comparison to the Ruefully ones, but we'll get it now. So as we've just seen, the tribunes were named in the number of 6 for each legion. According to Polybius, a tribune had to have at least 5 years of experience in the service, but the rule wasn't probably very tight, as for instance in the case of Scipio, not yet Africanus actually, but when he was younger, he was in fact a military tribune at Cannae, or Cannae if you prefer, that when he was not even 20 years old. So at this point he could have not had 5 years of seniority in the army. This information is provided by Livy 2253. So as you can imagine now, Rome, independently from the progressive decline of the Republic, had always been an oligarchy. So now the political gaming within these military functions was pretty evidently in the hands of the private, of the aristocracy. In fact, nevertheless, it's important. There was theoretically both a control still on the fitness of this personnel, and still at the same time the flexibility that was necessary to make kind of promising young men, just like Scipio was, to grow in absolute terms, the greatest commander of Roman history, notoriously. I'm sorry for the people who still think that Caesar was kind of the greatest general. No, it's Scipio Africanus. Point. End of the non-conversation, the non-discussion. But aside from this, there was also a certain other segmentation, because the tribunes with at least 5 years of service were called primi, so the first practically, and they definitely enjoyed some additional privilege or prerogative sort, while the tribunes that were elected by the people, that were called comitiati or comiziati, were generally considered more authoritative, and they were, because in fact that they still were theoretically elected by these republican ideals, and especially more authoritative compared to the Ruefully ones. So that maybe we should go a bit more in detail to explain the Ruefully consuls and so on, but we'll see it another time. The Ruefully tribunes, sorry, not Ruefully consuls. So no tribune was actually put, from an institutional point of view, at the command of one or more specific units of the legion. Neither of certain specific, like cohorts, for instance, or groups of cohorts, but every one of them was had the faculty, was enabled, if he was in this sense delegated by the superior, by his own superiors, to exercise a command over whichever unit he was in fact entrusted to him. That was entrusted to him, and even on the entire legion. So theoretically, this is particularly important. It makes you understand also the relevance of these figures sometimes, because the tribunes were growing as kind of also in here, like like the legati, as kind of men of trust that could even be entrusted the command of a certain unit. So this was not institutional. There was no direct control from the politics, but just from the Senate, but just from the magistracies. So theoretically, because naturally the Senate also in here was kind of all one, these were all, the Roman military was all led by fundamentally by the senators, but in this sense the magistrate was appointed in here could kind of decide also on the field who could be entrusted the command of what. And this naturally has many, many implications, because there were definitely figures that had also some good command capacity, for which they were eventually chosen, or they had some particular relation of trust with the superiors and so on. Not all the times, but theoretically, they could acquire a command if this was the case, depending on the will of the superiors. So in the consular armies, the tribunes of a legion usually made up 3 couples that were alternate for 2 months to carry out the usually the ordinary functions of administrative management. This is Levy 41. So this was part of the collegial nature of. So no, not really, but within the same legion there was a kind of a alternation, evenly to, like it was a bit like in the collegial functions of the consuls, etc., that sometimes the command was switched, in fact, not to make always the same person have a constant management of the situation. This could lead sometimes also to certain political, but especially military problems as well. But it was a Roman way to kind of check the excess of power of a certain individual, and to make kind of every one of the appointees participating. Simply because as we have seen, these were most of the times politically influent people, in a way or in another. Not really politicians themselves, but at least men of trust of certain politicians that had their say into the military matters as well, because they were directly involved into them. So when the tribunes were not in service, they usually instead carried out the tasks that were usually conferred directly to the consuls. So you see how important even the tribuni could be practically. So besides the functions exercised during the enrollment, because they participated to this as well, they also had the task to administrate justice within the castrum, and also to inflict fines and and other punishments. They also participated to the council of war together with the consuls and or their legati, in fact, as we have seen, and also with the Primus, Pilus, that was the centurion, first spared, was fundamentally the most important centurion of the army, and they had also a consistent military experience. He kind of had risen from the ranks and had a grasp of also what was happening among the troops. The Primus Pilus, that was the name, was the centurion that stood at the head of the first maniple of the triarii. And in this sense, it was the most elevated ranks also within the centurions of the same legion, and he had therefore this saying also in the military matters: please say triarii. Don't make me hear things like triarii, because that's literally the worst thing ever you can do to the poor Latin. there is also kind of a face, generally speaking, a more realistic face of the tribunes in itself, that usually, most of the times, they actually were no one but actually the young exponents of the senatorial and equestrian classes that were fundamentally just waiting for the traditional procedure of offices in the Roman, the cursus honorum, that was necessary to access the public offices, and therefore at that point they were kind of devoid of any specific experience. So obviously the greatest ambition for the Roman, for the young men of the Roman nobility was to become, obviously they had first of all to spend their years in the army, but in this sense this was a good occasion also to make experience within the same, and eventually rising through the ranks. Caesar actually, so we are at the end of the period, and we notice that Caesar actually hardly ever mentions the tribunes, nor he entrusted to them the important tasks, important duties, which leads to, it kind of appears generally this very limited consideration of their military capacities. That is kind of natural in many ways. Okay, so here we are, and we will be talking definitely still about the Roman chain of command, but because there is all an evolution also in later times, but fundamentally we still have to talk about centurions and other stuff, but we will leave that for another time. So for now, I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.